What you're about to hear is just one part of my deep dive on Zionism's legitimacy. 3. A brief history of diaspora. After the fall of Jerusalem and the Roman ban on the Jewish presence, the central institutions of the Jewish life were dismantled in the region. Over the course of centuries, many Jews left the region, not because of a single expulsion, but due to a long process of Roman repression, economic hardship, religious persecution, and the growing strength of the Jewish communities in the diaspora. Yet, despite all this, a continued presence of Jewish life remained in the region. For example, around 200 CE, Rabbi Yehuda Anasi compiled the Mishnah in the Galilee. The Mishnah is the foundational written version of the oral Torah, complementing the written Torah received from Sinai. And by the way, the term diaspora corresponds to the dispersion or spread of a people from their original homeland. So, the very use of the term diaspora already shows the connection of the Jews to the land. They didn't just move to someplace else forgetting their past. They considered themselves displaced and were waiting to return home. After all, it wasn't the first time that they were displaced. As we saw in 586 BCE, they were already exiled from their land, and after 50 years, when Cyrus the Great conquered Babylon, they were allowed to return home. That memory of return became a model. Even after Roman persecution, many still hope of restoration. Fast forward a few centuries to see the Jews wandering the world. They established great communities in North Africa, Middle East, and Europe. But then came the question of assimilation. Did the Jews melt in their local population? Did they at least take their culture? The answer to these questions depends on where the communities were. But first, I need to say that the Jews in diaspora were always a minority among a bigger population. Also, Judaism has never been a missionary religion. Converts exist, of course, but the process is much harder than, say, for Islam or Christianity. And it is initiated by the converts, not by outreach. In fact, tradition requires that a would-be convert be turned away multiple times, not to exclude him, but to ensure his sincerity. So all this to say that Judaism was never imposed on other people. In many cases, Jews were legally or socially segregated, which forced them to build strong internal structures, like synagogues, courts, schools, or charity networks that sustained them across many generations. Take the example of Jewish life in Poland and Lithuania. During the Middle Ages and the modern period, Jews were legally segregated from Christian society, but rather than collapse, Jewish life adapted, organized. They built kehillot, internal Jewish communities, with their own courts, Beit Din, schools, cheder and yeshivot, synagogues, and charity systems. Notice that these institutions weren't just religious, they were civic. The kehillah collected taxes, settled disputes, educated children, cared for the poor. Over the generations, they developed a distinct culture, complete with its own language, Yiddish, a fusion of medieval German, Hebrew, and Slavic languages, written in Hebrew script. They composed their own music, folklore, legal traditions, and even philosophy. Entire towns, shtetls, functioned as semi-autonomous entities. In a world that rejected them, Jews built parallel societies, rich in law, learning, solidarity, and resilience. It is precisely this internal infrastructure that allowed the Jews to survive for centuries of marginalization and carry their identity across exile after exile. That's actually the world captured in the movie Fiddler on the Roof. Even during so-called golden ages for Jews like Hellenistic Alexandria, Islamic Spain, medieval Baghdad, or post-Enlightenment Western Europe, Jews weren't accepted as full citizens and pogroms were still occurring. Under Islamic rules, at best they were considered dhimmis, a second-class citizen. Under Christianity, they were considered as a deicidal people, blamed for the death of Jesus. And even after the Enlightenment, Jews were seen as outsiders, as people from elsewhere. This is where the term antisemitism comes from. It was coined in the late 19th century by a German journalist, Wilhelm Marr. He opposed Jews not for their religions, but from ethnic and racial grounds. Even the most assimilated Jews that developed their own philosophy like Spinoza, Freud, Marx, Husserl, or Wittgenstein, were always seen as different individuals, as part of something else. And just as a side note, when the Nazis came to power, it became very clear that religion wasn't the center of their concern. It was race. For example, Husserl, that I just cited, was baptized in 1886, decades before, but it didn't matter to the Nazis, and he had to resign from his academic position. And before the Nazis, among other, there was the Dreyfus Affair in France, in which Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish officer, was falsely accused of passing secrets to the enemy, Germany. He was convicted of treason, beside flimsy evidence and clear sign of forgery. The military and much of the public insisted that he was guilty. Why? Well, because he was Jewish. So, faced with all this, Jews began wondering, where do we belong? Some believed that assimilation was the key, and we just had to try more even if we had to renounce our religion, our culture, our language. But others saw things differently. They thought that no matter how hard we tried, we would always be seen as the Jew, as the other. So they flipped the question, what if instead of hiding it, we began to fully embrace it and build something of our own? We called them the political Zionists, and their leader was a certain Theodor Herzl. They didn't just think of Zionism as a philosophical idea, but wanted to make it concrete. It was the end of the 19th century, and they dreamed big. They wanted to regain control of their life completely, and finally be the master of their own destiny. For that, they needed a state, and to build everything there. Schools, fields, homes. And where could this state be? I wondered. Of course it had to be in Israel. This is where it all started, where the very name Jew comes from. So I won't go into the full history of modern Zionism, because it would take hours, but I will just say one thing. It was no easy job. Literally everybody had a say in this, and the big powers wanted to be sure to have their interests respected in the matter. Yet, somehow, despite all odds, it happened. On May 14th, 1948, the State of Israel was finally declared.
תפתח לרווחה את שערי המולדת לכל יהודי ותעניק לעם היהודי מעמד של אומה שוות זכויות בתוך העמים.
The dream of an entire nation became true. So, with what I just said, I clarified a common misconception that the State of Israel was created just because of the Holocaust. Political Zionism predates the Holocaust by at least half a century, and the idea of returning to the land is as old as we are in exile. The only thing that the Shoah did was to make the great nations more sympathetic to the Zionist cause. But from the Jewish side, the idea was there long before. And actually, modern Zionism wasn't the first attempt to return home. It was simply the most successful and the last one. But before that, hundreds, if not thousands, of Jews came back to the land, mostly from religious devotion and without any coordinated vision for building a sovereign state. I hope that you're still here, because it's now time for diving in the defense of Zionism. Want to see the full argument? Check out the complete video. Links in the description.